So, what are podocytes and why do you care? That's what we're going to talk about today. So, I'm excited to share this with you. So, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we will go ahead and get started. So, podocytes, what is this? Why am I talking about this? So, if you've watched my other videos, I talk a lot about the structure of the kidney, okay? And so in the kidney, there is something called a glomerulus. So if you think about your labs, you can think about estimated glomerular filtration rate. So the glomerulus is the filtration part of the kidney, and it's like a little ball. It kind of sits in a on a basement membrane like this. And those podocytes will wrap around like this. I'm going to show you a picture of them in a minute, but they maintain the integrity of this filter. So I hear nephrologists say this all the time that a filter is kind of like a sieve or a colander, like it's got, the small holes in it. So what you want comes out and what you don't want to come out stays in. If your dog chewed on that colander and made the holes bigger, things that you didn't want, say if you were washing grapes and the grapes fell out, that's not what you want. So we want to maintain the integrity of this colander or filter of our kidneys. The podocyte is the final barrier to stop proteinuria. So we want that tight. We want the basement membrane secure so that the protein does not come through the kidneys into the urine. So this is on the left is the glomerulus, and you see this podocyte. See how it kind of wraps around. That's what it looks like. I think it looks like an octopus, kind of. But podocyte loss or damage is connected to what we've always said protein in the urine, which you never want, and progression of kidney disease to renal failure. So, podocyte injury. When your kidneys are injured, there's something called effacement and there is something called detachment. So effacement refers to just like the thinning or the flattening of the podocyte. If you compare that to detachment, is the complete loss of the adhesion of the podocyte to that basement membrane. So you want that podocyte to be attached to the basement membrane. You don't want it to completely come apart. That is the effacement. If it just sort of, I heard a nephrologist one time say it's kind of like a piece of Velcro. If it just effaces, it can kind of be reversed sometimes. But if it detaches, that is scarred. The nephron is now scarred and it is irreversible. So both of these lead to worsening of kidney disease. Okay, so proteinuria. This proteinuria goes along with when we're talking about podocytes because that's really how you almost tell that something's really damaged, that the basement membrane is really damaged. So damage to the podocytes leads to proteinuria. Um, so a lot of times, I say this all the time to people I work with, is that sometimes you don't know which came first. So like proteinuria is caused by kidney damage, right? The podocyte's damaged, but proteinuria is inflammatory and can cause further kidney damage. So we don't want it either way. But it's just that when I'm saying proteinuria, it's just the presence of protein in the urine. So your doctor might have you give a urine sample. And how do you know if it's a UPCR greater than 50 milligrams or 5 grams, or a UACR? You can see this in your urine labs of greater than 3 milligrams or 3 grams, then you know that you've got pretty significant proteinuria. You could also just ask your doctor or your dietitian if you have proteinuria. The degree correlates with disease progression. So it kind of tells how far along your disease has progressed. And it also correlates with a poor prognosis, like of a faster kidney decline. It can increase cardiovascular risk, and it is pro-inflammatory and pro-fibrotic. Fibrotic just means scarring. Again, we're back to that scarring. So it is something you care about. Podocytes are something you care about, and proteinuria is definitely something you should care about. And there is this is called the NKF heat map. So if you look on the left side, this is like the GFR, right? So 90, this kind of tells you like what stage you're in. But if you see, if you can have a pretty high GFR, and if you don't have proteinuria, you're kind of in the green. But as you move over to proteinuria, that is really what's telling us like, oh man, this is the prognosis is more poor because we're getting over here, we're adding the proteinuria to the GFR. Okay, so parts of the podocyte. Let's talk about these because the reason I want you to know this is because when I get into solutions, you'll know kind of what I'm talking about, what we're trying to fix. So you've got the foot processes. So these cover the outside of the glomerular basement membrane. So they're kind of wrapping around. This is so the foot process, the podocyte is the what I said before is kind of the last barrier, but they're parts of the podocyte are also kind of categorized as far as being the barrier. Okay, so this is the second, the foot process is the second to the last barrier to stopping proteinuria. And it connects, these connect like this. And so there's going to be, we're going to scoot over, there's a slit diaphragm, which is where they kind of connect. I thought about when I was thinking about the slit diaphragm, I was thinking about, gosh, that sounds kind of like a lot of people know more about the brain and like neurons, and you've got the synapse kind of like that. That's what it reminded me of. It's like a connection. Okay, so that's the foot process. The cytoskeleton regulates the podocyte, like the structure and the shape and the stability. So you think about like a skeleton being something stable. The smallest genetic mutation in the cytoskeleton can cause proteinuria and glomerular disease. And then onto the slit diaphragm is the cell to cell junction. So it's when they come together, the junction of the podocytes, it connects them. The slit diaphragm functions not only as, now this is the last barrier, the dead last barrier for proteinuria, but it's also a signaling platform to transfer signals in and out of the cell. So it does a lot of things. So, and it's like, again, going back to that sieve, a molecular sieve, it allows water and waste to pass through while it retains larger proteins and things like that. So you want all of these pieces to be intact. Okay. And then there are certain proteins that make up these parts. Again, I'm telling you this because when I talk about how we're going to help the podocytes, you'll know, okay, wait, she said something about that. This is what we're helping. So nephrin, and these are podocyte specific proteins. They're not all the podocyte specific proteins, but I can't cover them all today. But anyway, so the nephrin maintains the slit diaphragm function, what we just talked about. And it is strictly regulated. So down regulation of nephrin is seen in certain conditions like minimal change disease, membranous nephropathy, IgA nephropathy, lupus nephritis, diabetic kidney disease. Some of you may have these conditions. So nephrin dysfunction is very common in these. Other proteins are also important for the slit diaphragm, but we can't cover them all. Okay. And then podocin links the slit diaphragm to the cytoskeleton. So we were just talking about that. The cytoskeleton keeps the structure. So it's going to kind of link those together. It helps maintain the structural integrity of the slit diaphragm. It interacts with nephrin. And okay, so podocin, the expression of podocin can be altered in certain diseases. Here again, or different diseases that you may be aware of, like FSGS, lupus nephritis, IgA nephropathy. Those can affect podocin. And then common medications like ACE inhibitors or angiotensin receptor blockers. So ACE inhibitors could be something that end in pril, like lisinopril. An angiotensin receptor blocker would be Artin, like losartan. They have a protective role for the slit diaphragm. So if you've been put on these, your doctor may have said, we're doing this to stop proteinuria. Well, that's why, because they protect the slit diaphragm by promoting expression of nephrin and podocin to keep the whole, you see, we're trying to keep the structure stable. Okay. And then CD2AP directly binds nephrin and podocin to maintain the podocyte stability, the slit diaphragm structure, and function. All right, so now I just wanted to bring this back to you again to kind of show you yet another picture. There's the slit diaphragm, the foot process, just to kind of give you an idea of what this looks like, the basement membrane, all the things. I like pictures. And so here's another way to look at it. Okay, so now that you know what the podocyte is, what can we do to keep it as healthy as possible, even if we're dealing with some of these conditions? So, of course, we're going to talk about a plant-based diet because I always say that's the biggest lever you can pull to slow progression of kidney disease. And then we'll talk about other things like quercetin, berberine, which we've talked about before. I love berberine, curcumin, and astragalus. Okay, so plant-based diets. So these affect the podocyte in a roundabout way. But remember, if you've worked with me, I say all things go together. They just all flow on top of each other. So plant-based diets affect the podocyte because they promote alkalinity. They make someone more alkaline. Well, acidosis damages the podocyte. They lower proteinuria. We know that proteinuria, what I just said, is a symptom and it is a cause of podocyte damage. Plants are anti-inflammatory. So pro-inflammatory cytokines are associated with podocyte damage. So we want to drive down inflammation. And they lower intraglomerular pressure. So remember, we talked about the glomerulus sits in that basement membrane. We do not want the pressure. Pressure on that damages the podocytes through mechanical stress and stretching. So we want to pull back on that. Okay, quercetin. This is can be found in supplement form. Most of these supplements are done with on animal trials. So I like to just let people know where the research comes from. But animal studies indicate that it may reduce proteinuria by promoting nephrin and podocyte expression. So we want those, right? That's the structural proteins. It may inhibit that podocyte effacement where it effaces. It could inhibit that. It's mostly effective in conditions like diabetic nephropathy. Okay, berberine, of course, again, this is animal studies. Of course, it's going to improve progression of diabetic kidney disease because berberine will help lower blood sugar levels. I was actually talking with someone today who was on berberine, and the hemoglobin A1C came right down, right where we wanted it. And then she felt like she had to go off because she started taking another medication, which she didn't, but she felt like she did. And her A1C went right back up. So it really does help with blood sugar control. It upregulates the nephrin and podocyte expression again. So that's what we want. We want these things to be upregulated, to be working like they're supposed to be working. It inhibits renal interstitial fibrosis. So interstitial just means between cells and tissues. Fibrosis means scarring. So it will inhibit scarring in between the cells and tissues. It lowers inflammation. And it inhibits something called podocyte apoptosis. So apoptosis is just cell death. And we don't want podocyte cell death. So it's going to inhibit that. Okay, curcumin. So curcumin is what's found in turmeric. Again, animal studies, but curcumin is just so well known to lower inflammation. So it's going to do that. It attenuates the renal damage and scarring. So that's probably how it's doing that. It's just bringing down inflammation. Again, this one is really effective in diabetic nephropathy. Okay. So to summarize this, I got a quote from one of the research papers that I was reading to research this, but it says there are two ways to interpret the dearth of recent innovations in CKD treatment. Either the existing treatments offer completely effective relief for CKD patients, or the nephrology community has failed to find new treatment options. The globalization of CKD is a modern disaster that will require innovative solution. So that is what I'm trying to do here is come up with innovative solutions. We work with the nephrologists, we work with all the medications that they provide, but that usually does not get the job done. And so we have another tool in our toolbox, and that is nutrition. And so I hope that today you've actually found out that you do care that what a podocyte is and that you do want to preserve yours. And if you would like to work with me, there are notes in the description of this video where it has links you can go to find me if you want to work one-on-one. I have a book called Plant Fed Kidneys. Get the one that says For the Patient. That's available on Amazon. It's written especially for you if you're a patient. And or you can just email me at jen@plantfedwellness.com. So, and then just going through, these are my references. That is, if you want to connect with me, there's also a QR code. So anyway, I hope that this has been informative, and I always love teaching about all things kidney, and I hope everyone here has a wonderful evening. Thanks.